Welcome to Career Choices. On this show, we'll explore different professions so you can make an informed decision on your career choices. I'm your host, Elizabeth Gia. People may choose to work for a nonprofit organization because they're passionate about its cause. Well, today's guest has dedicated years to one nonprofit's purpose. About 10 years ago, Mr. Gotay started volunteering for the Cuba-America Jewish Mission. It's a local nonprofit organization providing support for the Jewish population in Cuba. Through his dedication and time, Mr. Gotay has also served as the organization's vice president, all on a volunteer basis. In today's program, Mr. Gotay will discuss his nonprofit leadership experience, including regular mission trips to Cuba, years before the normalization of relations between U.S. and the island nation. Welcome, Mr. Gotay. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I understand everybody's passion often comes through a personal connection. Can you tell me why you're so passionate or how you got involved with the Jewish Cuban Americans?
When I first moved to Washington, D.C., I was going to a synagogue in Kensington. And there I heard about Rabbi Sonny Snitzer was actually leading trips to Cuba. So I went to the Bethesda Jewish congregation and met him.
Yes.
And told him that I had been to Cuba 4 times already and that I knew people there and I had relatives and come away.
You're bilingual?
And yes, I'm bilingual. And
Very
he
nice.
said, great. He said, if you want to join us, we would love to have you. And I started going on trips with the community there.
When you say trips, how long are these trips?
They're usually a week. We usually have about 25 volunteers that come along. Each volunteer can carry up to 20 pounds of medicine.
Wow.
So the more volunteers you have, the more medicine you can take into the country.
Wonderful.
And about 40 pounds of personal items. So a lot of the work before the trip is actually getting medications from doctors, buying them here locally, finding out what's needed in Cuba. And the rabbi did a lot of those contacts. And then we go out and try to put it all together and take it down into Cuba.
So you're highly involved, obviously, in the Cuba-America Jewish Mission. Before that, it seemed like you were thinking about doing something for that community.
Yes.
And this opportunity presented itself. Is that correct?
Yes, I actually have, at that point I had relatives in Cuba, so I had been to Cuba 4 times before I started going with the rabbi. And I saw the need in Cuba, and that's universal.
When you say need, explain that. I heard a little bit about medical needs. What
Yes.
other types of needs?
When we first started going to Cuba, it was pretty extensive. I mean, even toothpaste was in short supply.
I see.
So any kind of soap, toothpaste, pencils for schools, anything they could get, they would be extremely grateful.
And as you became more involved with the Cuba-America Jewish Mission, you served as vice president.
Yes.
And what does that role entail, especially for a nonprofit?
Well, initially, I mean, the role didn't change too much. Initially, it was something run by the synagogue.
Okay.
When June Safra from California, who founded
The
Cajun,
founder.
when she founded it, she decided to retire, and she turned it over to the rabbi. At that point, the rabbi became the president, and he wanted me to be vice president, and we had a treasurer. And the role didn't change a lot. I mean, I still did translations for sermons.
Spanish to English or English to
Yes.
Spanish?
Yes, English to Spanish.
Wonderful.
Because the rabbi would do the sermon in English, and we would have a handout for the Spanish speakers so they could follow along. That changed later because we actually found, in the synagogue, there's a book called the Siddur, which is a book, it's like a hymn book. I guess that might be a good example, that we use for the services. And we actually found one, I think Rabbi Sonny found one in Costa Rica that was trilingual. That was English, Spanish, and Hebrew.
Wonderful.
So we bought hundreds of those and took them into the country.
And so as our viewers are learning about your role as the vice president of this nonprofit, many may become interested eventually in their career to becoming a leader. So tell us in terms of the distinction, what leadership traits are important for becoming in this type of a role, especially for nonprofits?
The good thing about a nonprofit is that there's such a need that every skill you have will be used. And you're going to increase your skills by volunteering. And that's universal in all, because I've also worked with the Combined Federal Campaign. That's universal for all charities. You can do as much as you want, and nobody's going to stop you from getting more involved. So the leadership skills, you learn a lot about interpersonal relations. It's a little bit different going to a foreign country.
So dealing with people.
Yes.
Maybe even a little bit diplomacy, since you are in Cuba.
Yes. There's a little bit of all of that. I mean, and just like any organization, be it a church or a mosque or a synagogue, you have the internal politics of the organization that you have to play in. So having those skills to be able to work with people is extremely important. But, you know, everything, there's such a need in these charitable organizations that you can definitely get involved, and there's a lot to be done. And the other benefit is that those things that you learn by helping a charity, you can transfer that to your career outside of the charity. So the skills that you learn about interacting with people, you can take that to your job.
So that means, in terms of your experience, would you say the skills you had at your job translated into this nonprofit volunteer vice president role?
Yes. Yeah, it definitely, they all cross-pollinate. So what you learn in one, you can use in the other.
Very good.
And after I think I had done like 4 or 5 missions to Cuba, and then I was sent to the Combined Federal Campaign.
When you say that, what is this Combined Federal Campaign?
The Combined Federal Campaign is the largest fundraiser. I think it might even be the world. All federal employees can donate money to the Combined Federal Campaign.
I understand. Okay.
It's the only organization that that's allowed to solicit from federal employees.
So it's a philanthropic outlet for federal workers like yourself.
That's correct.
Wonderful.
And last time I read, they had raised over a few $1 billion in their years of existence. It was started by President Kennedy. And since then, every year there's an annual campaign.
So now you're talking a little bit about how you had a regular 9-to-5 job, and then you also have work with your mission in your spare time. How did you balance and manage your time between these two, obviously very time-intensive roles?
You definitely have to read a book on time management because you have to balance. And you know, there's peaks and valleys. When we're getting ready for a mission, there's a lot of work.
When you say work, describe that. Is it paperwork?
It's paperwork. It's
supplies?
It's getting to know what supplies are needed, figuring out how to solicit the supplies, staging the supplies. And there's a lot of people involved. And then moving them to Cuba.
When you say the people who come with you on these missions, how large is this team?
It's about 20 folks. So each person, like I said before, carries a certain amount of medication. The U.S. government lets us take 20 pounds of medicine in per person. The Cuban government really doesn't care. They can bring 100 if you want, but the U.S. government has limitations on what you can take. There's also a lot of work that's done ahead of time because, you know, Cuba, we have an embargo against Cuba. So everything that we take into Cuba, money, supplies, and things like that, need to be approved by the Office of Foreign Assets.
So that office obviously approved every one of your mission trips?
That's correct.
And you can probably just briefly explain to our audience how this type of trip to Cuba was permitted, since we do have somewhat of a more strict policy up until now, of course.
Yeah, since we have an embargo against Cuba, because that's really what we have is an embargo. Any kind of business between a U.S. citizen or a U.S. company and the island has to be approved. any transfer of money between the U.S. or any U.S. entity to Cuba also has to be approved and has very specific channels to be able to transfer the money and things of that nature. So we had to go to the Office of Foreign Assets, which is part of Treasury, and get permission for all these missions and permissions for specific projects. Like if we were going to restore a synagogue, we would have to get permission to spend the money, or restore a cemetery.
That's very fascinating. It sounds like despite some of these challenges, it didn't stop or deter anyone from their missions. So I really think that's a very inspiring type of work. And right now, though, it's time for us to take a little break. But afterwards, I'd like to come back and explore more about these trips to Cuba.
That would be great.
Wonderful. So it's time to take a break, and we'll be right back with Mr. Gotay about his missions to Cuba. Stay tuned.
Packers.
Viking.
Packers.
Viking.
Viking.
Red state, blue state, vegan,
Carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
downtown.
Optimist.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities,
Live.
our families,
United.
even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
In the small town of Elmira, New York, a boy was born into an all-American family. The odds of him achieving his dream in the fashion industry? 1 in 23 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. I am Tommy Hilfiger, and my family is affected by autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to Career Choices. In today's program, we've invited Mr. Izzy Gotay to talk about his leadership with the Cuba-America Jewish Mission, a nonprofit organization. So, Mr. Gotay, it's been fascinating to talk to you about these mission trips that you've taken to Cuba before President Obama normalized relations with the island nation. So, tell me a little bit about these mission trips in terms of what kinds of people you were helping, or what kinds of projects specifically you were trying to accomplish in Cuba.
The people that we were helping is primarily the Jewish community of Cuba. And when we first started going there might have been like 1,700 Cuban Jews in Cuba.
Okay.
Indirectly, the general community gets helped because, like, when we make donations to them, if they don't need it, then they'll give it to the general population.
So I understand there's some photographs that we may be able to see. So let's take a look at these photographs, and you can talk about the trip based upon these photos.
Okay.
I understand one of them is a synagogue.
Yes. The picture shows a place called El Patronato, which is the main synagogue in Havana. It's also like the Jewish community center of Cuba.
Wonderful.
And the president of the community works out of that building. It's a beautiful synagogue. It was built right around the revolution.
That's the inside?
This is the inside of the synagogue. It's very beautiful, very well kept.
Wonderful. How many, did you say the numbers? How many Jewish Cubans were there at the time?
When we first started, there was like 1,600.
And that's under construction or renovation?
Yes, that was the renovation of the Sephardic synagogue, which is also in Havana. There's two big synagogues, and this is the other big ones.
I see.
And this is after the renovation was done.
Wow. So this renovation happened because of your mission trip?
We were a small part of it, but there's a lot of other organizations that were involved.
What is this memorial that we're looking
This
at?
is the Holocaust monument that's in Santa Clara that was put together with help from the Holocaust Museum here.
Wonderful.
They actually provided stuff.
Who's
The
that?
person there is David Thatcher. He's the president of the community of Santa Clara.
So, oh, and this?
See, that picture, those stones came from Auschwitz, and they were...
Oh, they're Auschwitz.
Yes, and they were donated by the Holocaust monument here to that monument in Cuba.
So briefly explain, how did the Jewish population get to Cuba? I understand you see that photo talks about the Holocaust. So how did they land in Cuba?
Well, the Cuban Jews go all the way back to Columbus.
Christopher Columbus.
Yes. As you know, his translator that came with him, he was his translator and his doctor. He was Jewish. He was a converso. And he came over with Columbus. And when Columbus returned back to Spain, he left him as the first governor of Cuba. So really, actually, the first governor of Cuba was Jewish.
Oh.
By birth, even though he had supposedly converted.
So these trips, it seems like you accomplished so much based upon these photos we're looking at. What are some challenges or hardships that you went through when you were on these missionary trips?
Well, I mean, you got to remember Cuba back then, even though it's a lot better now, was running into some dire economic straits. So getting accommodations, they didn't have as many hotels as they really needed. Most of the tourists there was very few American tourists. Most of them were Canadians, Europeans, and South Americans that we would run into. And just working with the Cuban government, because they basically ran all the hotels and pretty much all of tourism. Sometimes there was coordination issues. So, I mean, those were the big challenges. But it was extremely rewarding, too. But yes, there were challenges.
So as the vice president of Cuba-America Jewish Mission, you were telling me there's coordination that needs to happen. It's a pretty big undertaking. You're telling me about 20 people would go at a time.
Yes.
And so in terms of your personal growth or development, after you come back from a trip like that, how are you feeling?
I mean, when you return from Cuba, you feel great about what you did and what you accomplished. It's very, very rewarding to go there and help people.
Can you give me like an anecdote of, for example, who you met?
Yeah, I mean, after you've been there once or twice, you eventually get to know pretty much everybody in every community. There's 9 communities, and we tried to visit them all.
Is this 9 in Havana or multiple cities?
There's 3 in Havana, and then the rest of them are all over the country. Yeah, it's very rewarding. You get to meet people, and you get close real fast because they're small communities.
What do they tell you?
Well, they tell us about the conditions there. They tell us about what their needs are. We never talk about politics. We stick to the script that we're there to help. We're there for religious purposes, and that's actually what we're there for.
I see there's some more photos. Who is in this photo?
That's Rabbi Sonny Snitzer, and the lady standing beside him is a lady from Santi Spiritu, and he's basically showing them how to properly go through the Torah and read it.
This is the sacred text, the Torah.
Yes, the Torah.
I understand.
And that picture here is a picture of the synagogue in Camagüey, and that's my mother's hometown.
Wonderful.
And we had gone there to visit. It's a nice little synagogue.
Who are these people? Are they part of your mission or people there?
Yes, all these people were on the mission, and they came and helped with everything. These are children in Santiago, showing us how they learn how to do Israeli songs and dances.
Wonderful.
So they were dancing around. And
oh, is that you?
yeah, this is a good example of a traditional wedding in Camagüey.
This This is your wedding ceremony
yes.
there?
Yes, this happened about 20 years after we were married. But
It's romantic.
Elise she always wanted to get married in a synagogue and get a ketubah, which is a Jewish wedding contract,
I see.
and stand underneath the shuppah.
Shupa, okay.
Yeah. So, and all the people there are from the community here.
Is that the medical?
No, it looks like the medical, but it's actually, this is actually one of the few businesses that stayed in private hands.
Oh,
This is the Jewish butcher.
okay.
Since Jews are only allowed to eat beef
Yes.
and food has to be prepared in a certain way, the animals are sacrificed in a certain way,
It has to be kosher.
yes, it has to be kosher, and the way it becomes kosher is how that animal is processed.
I see.
And these are folks going through the quota for beef.
I see.
And
This photo, oh, look at the beautiful vintage vehicles. I mean,
Yeah, you really can't go to Cuba without getting a picture of old cars. Because most of the cars there are 1950 or before.
wow.
And like these cars that are there, they keep them in great shape.
It's beautiful.
It's unbelievable.
Thank you. Those were wonderful photos. So it seems like you've experienced so much and you weaved a part of your life, obviously, for years into Cuba. So is there any one or a few things you're most proud accomplishing while you're working with the Cuba-America Jewish Mission?
Well, I think the best thing was to actually be a part of it.
Because right now, are you saying what's the status right now?
Well, ever since Cuba opened up, the need for it isn't really there. And I mean, there's still need, but it's not as big as it used to be. So we've sort of cut down on the missions, but the organization's still there. And hopefully it won't be needed like it used to be. But I think one of the best things was one of the charters that we had was to help Cubans immigrate to Israel, Olim
Oh, wow.
immigrants.
Okay.
So we actually assisted a lot of people in immigrating from Cuba to Israel.
A permanent migration.
Yes.
I see.
So, and the more we got, the better it was. and you know, there's a lot of Cuban families in Eilat and in Beersheba and in Tel Aviv, all over Israel, that have immigrated over there.
I see.
So it sort of fulfills the requirement to return to Israel. And if they want to, we'll help them. So I think that was very rewarding too.
It seemed like you had a huge hand in an impact on a lot of people's lives.
And they had a big impact on our lives.
Yes.
When you go there and you help people, or anywhere, even if you help people here, there's an organization downtown called So Others May Eat.
Yes.
Yeah, and I've been to that a couple of times. And when you go there and you help others, you get just as much back. It's the same thing in going missions to Cuba or any other place.
That sounds very good. So for our viewers, what advice would you give for those who are interested in jumping in to nonprofit organizations in terms of being eventually a leader?
I would say jump in feet first. Bring all of your energy, bring all of your ideas to all of these charitable organizations. Get ready for some hard work, but a lot of rewards. So whatever skill you have can be used. So it doesn't matter if you're an expert in Excel spreadsheets, somebody will find something for you to do.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Gotay. This was a very fascinating topic, talking about you and Cuba and taking on these mission trips with your nonprofit. So I really appreciate it, and I hope our viewers also got a lot out of it. And so this ends today's program. Thanks to our guest, Mr. Izzy Gotay, and thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, suggestions, or if you would like to be part of your experience on career choices, please email us at qip.career.choices@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time on Career Choices.